Yesterday, Sam Shankland won his first quarter-final game against Sergey Karjakin. Absolutely beautiful performance, squeezing the life out of the Russian in really classic style. So that meant that in the second classical game, Sam the man only needed a draw to get through to the semi-finals. Let's take a look and see what happened. Don't forget, like, comment, share and subscribe, and do consider supporting us via Patreon or PayPal. Check out the rewards, extra videos and stuff on Patreon. Now, Karjakin with the white pieces plays his customary e4. Now, Sam plays the French defense. I always think of him as being a Sicilian player, but he does occasionally dabble with the French. And after 2.5 minutes thought, Karjakin didn't go for one of the main lines with d4, perhaps fearing that Shankland would be very well prepared. There could be liquidations. Instead, he played d3, the King's Indian attack. Now, a very old variation, as many of you know, a great favourite of Bobby Fischer's. But, well, it has, I think you could say, a kind of solid reputation. You know, you hang back. You're not claiming the centre, but it's hard to refute this system. But I think the main advantage for Karjakin in this situation is that it's not possible for black to liquidate. You know, you can't just exchange off lots of pieces in this variation. Of course, there are many ways for black to play. Sam goes for a5. And a quick advance to this a-pawn. Well, very often black throws forward these queenside pawns. It's rare to do it at such an early stage, but actually we do transpose to pretty normal lines. And Karjakin plays in the style of Fischer. Fischer recommended blocking this a-pawn much later on in the game, but still we do transpose to those kind of lines. So we're back into a pretty mainline King's Indian attack now after b5. And as I said, it was Fischer that first developed this idea to simply block that pawn on a4. So it's a very tense struggle, and, well, as I mentioned earlier, no exchanges, absolutely no exchanges, all the pieces on the board. Well, that's what Karjakin wants for a must-win situation. Bishop b7. It looks, to my eyes, like a slightly strange move, because the bishop could be more actively placed on a6. But it's interesting, you know, when I fed this into the computer, that is the computer-approved move. It just shows how, you know, players are very much influenced these days by the engines. So Karjakin had a bit of a think here, and he played h5. I mean, it's tricky to know whether you should play the knight here, the bishop here, the queen here, or indeed push forward with the h-pawn. Karjakin went for h5. And I think that's an interesting idea, actually. Because, I mean, of course, it's pretty standard. But to do it first, before committing this knight, I think is a clever move. So if black pushes forward on the queen side, then obviously h6, and now we'll put the knight round to g4. And, well, I've always thought that these positions are very comfortable for white. In the long term, when the position opens, then the king is going to have problems. Not immediately, but later on. Shankland played h6. Personally, I think it's a good idea. I think it's important to block this h-pawn. Bishop f4, supporting this one, and preparing queen d2. And you never know, on a good day, white may be able to sacrifice. But that's why it's important now to move this rook. Rook fc8 looks reasonable, because, of course, after these sacrifices, well, either knight or bishop could potentially drop back to support the king. So g4 yeah, I think this is why it was good to delay putting the knight here, because actually it's not clear the knight wants to be on h2. It might go there, but it might be deployed somewhere else. Just depends on the circumstances. And here Shankland played the queen backwards. You know, he got a little bit nervous about his king. I think that's very understandable. But this is a typical idea in these kind of positions. Knight d4. I think that's a decent alternative, just to exchange off one of white's attacking pieces. And of course, if white exchanges, then there's potential pressure on the pawn on c2. Or not potential pressure, actual pressure. So knight d4 is an interesting option, but queen d8 also seems reasonable. Okay, the knight does come to h2 anyway. Rook a6. And king h1. Now we can see the idea that Karjakin wanted to remove that knight just to be able to bring the rook across, and he wants to push through with g5. And I have to say, this looks absolutely terrifying for black. The king is on the end of that rook, g5 is coming, and what is happening with black's counterplay on the queen side? Now, well, the computer has nerves of silicon, and it still thinks that after this, that's the point of rook a6, still thinks that black is okay here. Black has sufficient counterplay, but it looks so slow to me, and I prefer white's position, no matter what the computer says, because this is such a straightforward plan. The problem for black is that if you get one move wrong, the king gets his head blown off. If white gets a move wrong, well, you might drop a pawn on the queen side, but that's not fatal. I think this is the point. You know, there is considerably more jeopardy for black in this position. I will actually learn to speak properly, hopefully soon. Rook g1 has just been played. Knight f8. And now an interesting little diversion from Karjakin. I mean, you know, one might think that bishop f1 and g5 is the right way to go, but, well, I can see why he did this. He took on b4. Now, knight takes is just going to block black's counterplay, so c takes b4, I mean, looks quite nice. But here's the point, d4. This is why Karjakin exchanged. That d-pawn is now blocked, which means the bishop on b7 is blocked. You see, Karjakin wants to be able to play bishop f1 to force through g5, but then comes d4, and you can see that is very uncomfortable for white's king. So that's why he exchanged and played d4 to lock in that bishop on b7, and now he is simply ready to play bishop f1 and g5. Once again, the computer still thinks that black is okay after a3, but I mean, it looks strange to me because after b3 the position just closes. There's seems to be no way in for black's pieces. I mean, maybe you have to play slowly here like this. But, you know, white can defend that. There's bishop coming here. I don't know, or rook a2 or something. It looks too slow to me. Knight a5 played by Shankland, and now g5. Karjakin pushes through. Knight c4 hits the queen. The queen drops back. So white threatening to take here. Pawn takes pawn. Bishop takes. And now it's pretty desperate for black. The problem is that, you know, this pawn kind of cuts black's position in two, very typically for French positions. And black can't bring pieces over to defend the king. So b3, well, Shankland's still trying to drum up play. Bishop takes, queen takes, and bishop f1. This has been on the cards for some time, so just opening up the g-file. And here, well, here Shankland had to play f5 to protect that pawn. Now, this is definitely better for white, but it is still tricky. White still has a pretty powerful attack. Here's a nice idea, actually. After this exchange, see that knight is pinned. That's very annoying. So just because of that, it's not easy for black to get counterplay going. And this pawn is a problem. This pawn is a problem. These knights can potentially come into the position. Rook c7, knight e5, for example. White is definitely better here, but it's still messy. But Shankland played pawn to a3. Now, over to you. I'm going to have a quick slurp of tea. You have a quick think. How would you play here with white? Now, I'm not just looking for one move. You need to calculate right to the end. White to play. Cheers. That's good stuff. Now, here we go. In fact, Karjakin thought for, well, two and a half, almost 3 minutes over that move. Not very long at all. In fact, I would say the calculation isn't very deep. It's not complicated. Simple follow-up, knight g4, threatening queen h6 and knight f6. Well, let me just show you that. Takes, check, here, check, got to take, and the kiss of death mate on the next move. So black has to play f5. Takes, the queen has gone. You can take that, but it's not only the fact that the queen has gone, but white's queen is coming in to do the biz. Well, Shankland is still hacking away. I mean, he knew at this point that he was lost. Check. h6 is a nice move. Threatening mate. Karjakin was playing these moves very, very quickly. So if you get a queen, queen g7 is mate. Knight g6 blocks for a moment. Knight h4, again, just threatening to take here. And here's a nice move. This didn't happen, but if rook g8, h7, threatening to take the rook. And then knight g6. And this is, well, it's a kind of comical position. I mean, white is winning in all kinds of ways, but it's just funny that in this position, the threat is to promote to a third knight. Actually, let's just see that. If I get... Oh no, I've got a pre-move here. Unfortunately, I can't turn it into a knight, but you can imagine a knight there, and that is actually checkmate. Okay, back to this position. Here's the game. Do you know what? Sam was a true gent here. He knew exactly what was happening, and he allowed his king to be checkmated. He went right to the end and gave us all a nice picture on the board. So I have to say, all credit to Sam. You know, he knew what was coming, but yeah, gives us a nice picture at the end. I think a true gent. So Sergey Karjakin levels the score. It's 1-1 after the two classical games. They now go into a tie-break. What's going to happen? Can Sam still do it? Can he get to the semi-final? Let me know what you think. Tie-breaks tomorrow. They play 2 rapid play games. Then if it's still equal, 2 10-minute games. Then 2 blitz games. And if that's still equal, an Armageddon game. So can he still do it? Let me know. And quick word to my patrons. The newsletter and extra vids will be coming very soon at the beginning of the month, as usual. Just got a lot of stuff to do here, but they will be arriving shortly. Anyway, thanks everyone for watching.